Rachel Myers still remembered the hum of the diner lights and the painful pang in her chest. The moment Michael Sterling had laughed at her dream. She had been so proud, so sure that sharing her bold ambition with the charming customer was the right thing to do. After all, he had asked about her hopes and plans. But when he chuckled unapologetically, derisively, Rachel felt her cheeks burn in shame. She wanted to disappear into the scuffed black and white tiles beneath her feet. Never did she imagine, years later, that the same man, now a millionaire, would appear at her doorstep, carrying more secrets than she could ever expect. Long after midnight, the Hidden Oaks diner often served a ragged assortment of travelers passing through Briarsville. Truckers from the interstate, shift workers, and sometimes couples on the verge of heartbreak. It was a modest but well-loved establishment with peeling teal booths, a scratched countertop, and a neon sign outside that never quite stopped flickering. Rachel Myers worked the graveyard shift, balancing trays laden with coffee pots and blueberry pie slices, smiling through exhaustion. She was in her mid-20s, tall but slightly stoop-shouldered from carrying plates for so many hours each night. Despite her struggles, there was a sparkle in her eyes when she spoke about her dream. She wanted to own her own little café, a cozy place that served more than just food, somewhere people could experience genuine hospitality and warmth. She didn't share that dream often. Too many people in her life had warned her to stay realistic. Her parents, well-meaning though they were, reminded her constantly of their family's financial constraints, how they had never quite escaped the paycheck-to-paycheck grind. But Rachel couldn't help being ambitious. She pictured an airy space with pastel walls, an aroma of roasted coffee beans, and local artists rotating their works on the walls. She pictured a line out the door every weekend. That night, Michael Sterling wandered into the Hidden Oaks diner. It was nearly 2 a.m. He had the air of a man ready to move mountains, yet worn down by something intangible. The minute he walked in, Rachel noticed the bright gleam in his eyes and the tired slump of his shoulders, a curious mix of optimism and fatigue. He took a seat by the window. Rachel approached, balancing a pot of coffee. "Good evening," she said, mustering a smile. Or should I say morning? Either way, welcome to Hidden Oaks. Can I start you with some coffee? Michael nodded. Sure, coffee. He glanced at her name tag. Rachel, right? She poured him a cup, and though it was well past midnight, there was something in his gaze that sparked a conversation. He asked about her shift, whether she liked working nights, and how she spent her days. For reasons she could never quite explain, Rachel opened up. She told him about her idea to open her own place someday. She mentioned how she had been saving up every tip for the past 4 years. She had a binder in her small apartment, filled with sketches and magazine clippings for interior design. She even had potential menus scribbled in a notebook. Michael listened at first, nodding politely. But as she reached the part about wanting to serve community and become a staple in town, something in his expression changed. He offered a half smile, then let out a quiet scoff. "You really think you can do all that?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "It's not that simple, you know." She felt heat crawl up her neck. "I know it's not simple," she said, voice tight, "but I'm working on it." She saw him tilt his head, the corner of his mouth curving in slight disbelief. He chuckled, sipping his coffee. "Well," he said, "good luck, I guess." Rachel forced a polite grin, though she felt a sting in her chest. She had shared her biggest dream, and his reaction was laughter, dismissive, condescending. It felt like a slap to her face. She made an excuse to go check on another table, the fizz of unspoken resentment still burning in her mind. Little did she know that this tiny late-night encounter would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would forever change both of their lives. Michael paid his bill quickly that night, leaving a tip that could almost be called generous. But for Rachel, his money didn't erase that mocking tone. She tried to shrug it off. She had dealt with belittling customers before. That was just part of the job. Still, something about Michael's dismissiveness got under her skin. Days turned into weeks. Rachel continued her routine, sleeping a few hours in the morning, then rising before noon to review her cafe plans. She found herself thinking about that conversation more often than she cared to admit. Why had Michael's reaction grated on her so intensely? She could have brushed it aside, yet it lingered like a bruise refusing to heal. Then, on one particularly slow shift, she saw a headline on the local news channel playing on the diner's small mounted TV. Ambitious tech startup emerges from Briarsville. The camera cut to a polished, modern office in the downtown area. The reporter spoke about a new software company that had just secured major investment. On screen, the founder gave a short interview. Rachel nearly dropped the plate she was drying when she recognized him, Michael Sterling. His black hair was neatly combed, and he wore an impeccable navy blue suit, quite a contrast from his disheveled look at the diner. He was articulate, confident, and carried himself like someone used to being listened to. The interview was short, but it concluded with the reporter mentioning Michael's big dreams of scaling operations nationwide. Rachel swallowed hard. It hadn't clicked at the time that this was the same man. Of course, it made sense, his restlessness at 2 a.m., the tired drive in his voice. He was already building his empire. And yet, he had laughed at her dream. That night, her friend and co-waitress, Lydia White, found Rachel staring at the TV long after the segment ended. "Why the sour face?" Lydia asked, lightly bumping Rachel's shoulder. Rachel shook her head. "You see that guy? He's the one who laughed at me when I told him I wanted my own cafe." Lydia's eyes widened. Men and their egos." She paused. "But that's the same guy, right? The new local tech genius? Maybe he was just having a bad day." Rachel shrugged. "I guess. But it felt more personal than that. Like he thought I was a fool." A tense silence settled between them, broken only when the bell jingled at the front door, signaling a new customer. Rachel forced a smile and got back to work. Over the next few years, Michael Sterling's name popped up everywhere: local magazines, business conferences, charitable events. Each mention was a reminder of that night at the Hidden Oaks diner. Rachel tried to focus on her own plans, yet it was hard not to compare her slow progress to Michael's meteoric rise. She was still just a waitress with big plans. He was the shining star of Briarsville business, soon to become a millionaire and possibly more. But life had a strange way of turning the tables when least expected. Rachel's life took a complicated turn. A year later, her father fell ill and eventually needed expensive medication that insurance didn't fully cover. Rachel found her tips spread thin, paying for both rent and her father's mounting bills. Her dream of opening a cafe drifted further and further away. She couldn't save like she used to. Her extra pennies went to doctors, prescriptions, and an ever-growing list of health-related expenses. During this difficult time, Rachel found solace in journaling, pouring out her frustrations and hopes in pages she never meant for anyone else to read. She jotted down new menu ideas, cost estimates, location scouting notes, anything to keep her dream alive, even if it was only on paper. Her heart ached, imagining the day she could finally welcome customers to her own space, greet them by name, watch families form memories there. It was a single bright light in an otherwise dark world. Despite the emotional toll, Rachel persisted. She juggled shifts at the diner, occasional catering gigs if she could find them, and hours by her dad's side. She grew accustomed to giving more than she ever got back. A few times, though, she caught herself thinking about that night with Michael. She recalled how he had scoffed at the challenges she'd face, how he probably believed she would never overcome them. She tried to remember that no matter what, she had to do this for herself, not to prove him wrong, but to prove to her own heart that she could succeed. Meanwhile, Michael's tech startup soared. It was no longer an up-and-coming local business. Investors from bigger cities showed interest, and rumor had it that Michael might expand overseas. He had his face plastered on business magazines, lauded as the Briarsville prodigy. Rachel only knew bits and pieces gleaned from the TV, at work, or from articles she saw in newspapers. She never forgot the feeling of humiliation from that short exchange, but she was too busy to nurse a grudge. Life kept her fully occupied. Then, on a stormy evening, about 3 years after their initial encounter, a twist of fate brought Michael Sterling back into her world, or, more accurately, brought her into his. Sheets of rain poured down that night, turning the road slick and the sky into a swirling mass of dark clouds. Rachel was driving home from the pharmacy, picking up her father's medication. She tried to stay calm, even as the storm made visibility nearly impossible. She turned onto Pine Grove Road, a secluded and winding route lined with tall pines. The rhythmic thwack-thwack of her wipers was her only solace. That's when her headlights briefly caught sight of a figure standing at the side of the road, next to a sleek, unmarked SUV with hazards flashing. She slowed down, concerned that someone might be in trouble. As she pulled closer, she saw that it was a man in a soaked business suit, looking flustered. She rolled down the passenger window just enough to be heard over the pounding rain. "You okay?" she called. The man turned around, and a flash of lightning illuminated his face, Michael Sterling. For a second, Rachel was torn. Should she keep driving and leave him to figure it out? A fleeting sense of petty satisfaction flickered, but she pressed her lips together. She wasn't raised to ignore someone in distress, even if that someone had once belittled her dream. With a sigh, she opened the passenger door. "Michael, right?" He did a double take. "Rachel? Wait, the diner waitress?" She nodded, pushing aside the swirl of conflicting feelings. "Need a ride? I can call for help if you'd rather wait for a tow truck." He ran a hand through his drenched hair. "I'd appreciate a ride. My phone died, and my spare battery is, well, it's soaked." Of all nights for this to happen, Rachel's stomach lurched at his voice, but she nodded curtly. "Get in." Michael slid into her car, bringing with him the smell of rain-soaked leather and an air of awkwardness. The tension was thick. In better circumstances, Rachel might have confronted him about that laugh years ago. But tonight, all she wanted was to get out of the storm and get her dad's medicine home. They spoke few words. She asked for an address, and he gave directions to a swanky neighborhood on the outskirts of Briarsville. It was the kind of area lined with extravagant homes perched behind tall gates. She'd never actually driven through it before, but she'd heard stories, mega mansions, manicured lawns, private security. When they finally reached Michael's address, he cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said, fumbling in his pockets. "I'm not sure how to," she cut him off. "No worries. Just take care." He looked like he wanted to say more, but Rachel drove off before he could gather his thoughts. As she sped away, she felt a twinge of satisfaction that she hadn't asked for anything. Let him wonder about that. That stormy night encounter might have seemed like the end of their tale, but in truth, it was only the beginning. A few weeks later, Rachel got the phone call she had been dreading. Her father had a major complication, and the doctors wanted to prepare her for the worst. She rushed to the hospital. Her father, James Myers, was on a ventilator, his face ashen and eyes sunken. The prognosis was grim. She spent the next 48 hours in the waiting room, refusing to leave unless absolutely necessary. She lost track of time, half-conscious from grief and sleeplessness, pacing the sterile corridors. Nurses gently reminded her to go home and rest. She couldn't. She couldn't bear the thought of not being there if he woke up, if he needed her for anything. Eventually, her father regained a flicker of consciousness. She rushed to his bedside, tears pooling in her eyes. In a fragile voice, he managed, "Rachel, I'm so proud of you." She squeezed his hand. "Dad, don't talk like that. We'll get you better." Her father's eyes were distant. "I know you'll open that cafe someday. Don't give up." It felt like a blade twisting in her chest. She murmured reassurances, carefully combing his thinning hair away from his forehead. Moments later, the monitors beeped urgently, and a flurry of medical personnel swept in. Rachel was ushered out of the room. Standing in the hospital corridor, she trembled, tears spilling silently onto her worn shoes. All she could do was stare at the closed door, praying for a miracle. During one of these agonizing nights, she stumbled to the cafeteria for a cup of coffee. She nearly collided with someone in the hallway. Glaring upward, her reddened eyes met Michael Sterling's gaze. He looked just as startled to see her there. "What?" she mumbled. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed hard, looking suddenly vulnerable. "My mother," he said quietly. "She has a heart condition. She's been in and out of this hospital all year. It got worse tonight, so I flew back from a business trip." For a moment, all the old animosity drained away. They were just two people in the hospital hallway, each fearing for a loved one's life. Rachel bit her lip. She didn't know what to say. She'd never imagined that Michael could also be going through a heartbreak of his own. "How? Is she okay?" she managed. He shook his head. "They're running tests. I'm praying for good news." His eyes fell on the coffee machine next to them, as if longing for some respite. Then he blinked at her tear-streaked face. Are you all right?" Rachel tried to form words, but they lodged in her throat. She ended up wiping her cheeks. Not really. They stood there, two near strangers connected by sorrow. Without speaking further, they offered each other the faintest, bitter-sweet sympathy. Over the next few days, Michael and Rachel crossed paths in the hospital hallways more often. Sometimes it was just a nod, sometimes a wave. Neither had the emotional energy for hostility or resentment. And maybe that was a good thing. Rachel's father was transferred to palliative care. The doctors told her it was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, Michael's mother's condition stabilized enough for him to take a breath, though she remained under close watch. One afternoon, Rachel sat in the hospital chapel, shoulders slumped. She was alone, trying to find a sliver of hope or comfort in the dusty shafts of light streaming through stained glass windows. Unexpectedly, Michael slipped in. He hovered near the door, hesitant, then quietly approached. "I'm sorry about your father," he said. She pressed her lips together. "Thanks," he sighed. "I know we never really we don't know each other at all, but if there's anything you need a ride maybe, or help with, something, let me know." She looked at him, uncertain. Part of her wanted to snap, to remind him how he'd dismissed her dream like it was foolish. But a larger part of her acknowledged that this was a sincere gesture from someone also going through a crisis. "I appreciate that," she replied, "but I'll be all right." He nodded, then stared at the mosaic of saints on the chapel walls. In a low voice, almost to himself, he added, "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. Days passed, and in a heartbreaking turn, her father slipped away one early morning. Rachel was holding his hand, tears staining the hospital bedsheets. The hospital staff performed their protocol with quiet efficiency, offering condolences in hushed voices. Rachel felt numb, like her entire world had evaporated, leaving her adrift in a sea of sadness. She wasn't sure why, but when she walked out of the hospital, she found Michael standing in the parking lot. He must have seen the look on her face, because he took a single step forward. "He's gone," she whispered, voice trembling. Michael's expression flickered with empathy. He wanted to reach out, touch her shoulder, offer comfort, but the awkwardness of their connection held him back. Instead, he offered a quiet, "I'm really sorry." Rachel swallowed, her lips trembling. She offered a slight nod, tears drying in the cold air. Then she walked away, wondering if maybe, somehow, life had bigger plans for them both. For the next several months, Rachel faced funeral arrangements, mounting debts from medical bills, and the emotional aftermath of losing her father. She had little time to think about Michael Sterling or the short glimpses of humanity he had shown at the hospital. Instead, she put all her energy into staying afloat, renewing her lease, trying to arrange partial payments with the hospital, and leaning on Lydia for emotional support. One afternoon, while picking up groceries at a discount market, Rachel nearly bumped into Michael again, this time in the produce aisle. He looked different, sporting a casual jacket and a simpler demeanor. Gone was the high-powered entrepreneur vibe. He was pushing a cart, studying a shopping list, and seemed momentarily lost in thought. The chance meeting was awkward at first, both recalling their last moment of shared grief. Yet after the immediate surprise wore off, Michael asked about her father's memorial service. Rachel explained quietly, a gloss of sadness returning to her eyes. When she asked about his mother, Michael's lips thinned. "She's hanging in there," he said. "The doctors say it's manageable, but she'll need constant medication. I've been trying to rearrange my schedule so I can be around more often." They lingered, an uneasy conversation bridging the gap between them. At some point, Rachel let slip how overwhelmed she was with her father's medical bills, how her cafe dream was on indefinite hold. Michael listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern. "You said you had business expansions and deals," Rachel remarked, forcing a half smile. "I guess that means you're off to bigger cities soon." Michael hesitated. "Actually," he said, "I've been thinking of setting up a philanthropic fund, something to support small business ventures. One, I never told you, but I always admired the guts it took for you to keep that dream alive." Rachel stared at him, stunned. "But you laughed at me," she said, a hint of bitterness creeping back. He looked away, embarrassed. "I was an arrogant fool back then," he admitted. "I had no idea how hard people worked to pursue something they truly cared about. I'm sorry." Tears threatened at the corner of her eyes. She glanced down at the bruised apples in her shopping cart, thinking about her father. A swirl of emotions roiled in her chest: anger, regret, nostalgia, and maybe a trace of relief. "Thank you for saying that," she managed. They parted ways with no promises, but something had definitely shifted. A few weeks later, Rachel got the surprise of her life. As she arrived home from a double shift at the diner, she found a sleek black car parked near her rundown apartment complex. The moment she stepped out of her own dented sedan, she saw Michael stepping onto the sidewalk, adjusting his jacket. Her first thought was that something terrible must have happened. Why else would he be there? But he quickly held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm sorry for ambushing you like this," he said, "but I wanted to talk to you." Rachel hugged her purse to her side, too exhausted to hide her skepticism. "About what?" He drew in a breath. "I'd like you to meet some people," he said. "Investors and partners who help fund local businesses. I want you to pitch your cafe idea." Her jaw nearly dropped. Was this some kind of joke? "Michael, my father's medical bills." He nodded, serious. "I know, but if you present a strong plan, we might secure a loan or a grant. I can't promise anything, but I'm willing to put in a good word. I know you've done your homework, and your dream is worth hearing out." She blinked, her heart pounding. A swirl of excitement warred with a sea of doubts. Could this be real? Had the same man who once dismissed her dream come to support it? I don't have the perfect pitch ready," she sputtered. "And I'm not exactly in the best place in my life right now." He gave her a small smile. "No one ever is. Look, if you don't want to do it, I understand. But I'll be at the Briarsville Business Forum on Saturday. If you change your mind, that's where you'll find me. Presentations start at 10. She looked at him, her mind reeling. "Why are you doing this?" A shadow flickered across his face. "Because I regret how I acted, and maybe because I believe you deserve a chance." Before she could probe further, Michael gave her a nod, returned to his car, and drove away. Rachel stood on the sidewalk, her breath still caught in her chest. Part of her wanted to say yes. Part of her was terrified. But the next day she pulled out the old binder filled with sketches, budgets, and notes she had compiled for years. She stayed up late, meticulously organizing her ideas. She typed up a short proposal, printed photos of interior designs she adored, and practiced her spiel in front of her cat, Saffron. By Saturday morning, she was a trembling bundle of nerves, but she forced herself to show up at the Briarsville Business Forum. Inside the conference hall, men and women in suits milled around, discussing deals and expansions. Modern pull-up banners displayed local businesses, city projects, and philanthropic endeavors. Rachel felt like a fish out of water in her simple outfit. Her throat constricted as she clutched her folder, scanning the room for Michael. She finally spotted him near a set of double doors, talking to a small group. When she caught his eye, he excused himself and hurried over. "You came," he said, relief in his voice. She nodded, almost too nervous to speak. "Where do I go?" He escorted her to a small table where a panel of 3 potential investors sat with notepads and laptops. Rachel introduced herself, tried not to fidget, and then launched into her pitch. As she spoke about her dream cafe, she could almost see the warm lighting, feel the coffee beans between her fingers, and hear the laughter of satisfied customers. She explained how she wanted to source ingredients locally to bolster other small farms in the area. She showed them her estimates for startup costs, potential profit margins, and her plan for repaying any loan she might receive. Her voice trembled at first, but then passion took over. She answered every question, from supply chain logistics to staffing plans. In the audience, Michael watched quietly, a faint smile playing on his lips. When she finished, her cheeks were flushed, and she felt breathless, exposed, but hopeful. The investors exchanged looks, asked a few more questions, and took her contact information. They would deliberate privately, they said. Rachel thanked them and walked away feeling dazed. Michael offered her a bottle of water, which she accepted with shaking hands. "You did great," he assured her. She gave him a shaky smile. "We'll see what they decide," he nodded. "Either way, you should be proud." A swirl of gratitude and lingering wariness churned in her stomach. She wanted to ask him so many questions: why he had laughed at her that night in the diner, what had changed his mind, what he truly thought of her plans. But she couldn't find the words right then. Days ticked by. Rachel waited by her phone, sleepless and anxious. She almost convinced herself it was a lost cause when an email arrived in her inbox. The investors wanted to move forward with her. They offered a modest but workable loan, enough to get her started if she was careful and resourceful. She literally screamed when she read the email. Then she covered her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. This was it. Her moment, after everything, the mocking laugh, the hospital grief, the hopelessness, she finally had a shot at her dream. Rachel set to work with relentless determination. She found a small corner space near the outskirts of downtown, previously home to a bakery that had closed down. The rent was affordable, and the storefront needed serious renovation, but she saw the potential. Day after day, she painted walls, installed new light fixtures, and sanded down battered wooden tables. Lydia pitched in whenever she could, scrubbing floors and helping Rachel manage the labyrinth of city permits. Friends from the diner donated hours and leftover materials. It was a communal effort that made Rachel's heart swell with gratitude. Michael occasionally stopped by, often in his business suit, carrying a paper bag of lunches or a tray of freshly brewed coffee. Sometimes he rolled up his sleeves and helped. Other times he just watched Rachel, an unspoken admiration in his eyes. She never quite grew comfortable with his presence. Memories of his initial ridicule still stung, but she noticed how he treated her with respect and genuine support now. One evening, long after the construction workers had left, Rachel was painting a final coat of mint green on the cafe's walls. Michael walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. "Thanks," she murmured, leaning against a stepladder. He looked around at the partially finished space. "It's coming together beautifully," he said. "I can see it. People lining up here in the morning for pastries, college students grabbing afternoon coffee. You did it." She turned to him, paint roller in hand. "I'm doing it," she corrected softly. "It's not done yet." They stood in silence for a moment, the air tinged with mutual respect and a layer of unresolved tension. Finally, Rachel found the courage to say what had haunted her for years. "Why did you laugh at me that night at the diner? You probably don't even remember, but it felt so personal." Michael set his coffee on a nearby crate, exhaling slowly. "I remember," he said. "I was arrogant. I thought success had to look a certain way, tech deals, flashy projects. When I heard you talking about a small cafe, I dismissed it as too modest, and I laughed. I'm ashamed of that." She stared at the floor, feeling the ripple of old hurt. "And now?" He raked a hand through his hair. "Now, I realize how fulfilling it can be to build something that connects people. I see how much heart you pour into this. I wish I could go back in time and not be such a jerk." Rachel studied his face, searching for sincerity. She found it in the slight quiver of his voice and the tight set of his jaw. "You can't change the past," she said, swallowing back tears. "But you're here now." He nodded, an odd mix of relief and regret in his expression. After a beat of silence, he reached into his pocket and produced a small envelope. "I've been meaning to give you something." She cocked an eyebrow, wiping stray paint from her wrist. "What is this?" "Just open it later," he said. Then he grabbed his coffee again, gave her a thoughtful smile, and left her to finish painting. When she finally opened the envelope that night, in the quiet solace of her newly minted office, she found a handwritten note and a cashier's check. In the note, Michael explained that he wanted to cover her remaining debts, her father's medical bills, and give her a chance to start fresh. Tears blurred her vision. She clutched the envelope, a whirlpool of gratitude, guilt, and awe churning in her heart. She couldn't decide whether to accept his help or return the check out of pride. But as she fingered the edges of the paper, she remembered her father's final words, "Don't give up." Maybe, just maybe, help was exactly what she needed to fully launch into the future she'd always envisioned. Grand opening day arrived with spectacular weather, bright sunshine, crisp air, and a gentle breeze that carried the aroma of fresh pastries from the newly christened Rachel's Haven. The storefront boasted a mint green door with gold lettering, wide glass windows revealing the cozy interior, and small potted plants that lined the sidewalk. Inside, walls were adorned with local art, Rachel's tribute to the community. The menu featured handcrafted pastries, artisan coffee, sandwiches with ingredients from local farms, and daily specials that reflected seasonal produce. Friends, family, and curious patrons piled in throughout the day. Lydia worked the register, wearing a proud grin. It was a whirlwind of orders, laughter, and well wishes. Rachel hardly had time to breathe. At one point she emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her hair, to see a line stretching out the door. Customers were praising her croissants, calling them the best in town. Every table was occupied. Nervous excitement threatened to overwhelm her, but she couldn't stop smiling. In the midst of the bustling crowd, she spotted Michael, standing by the counter, arms crossed, as he quietly surveyed the scene. He looked genuinely happy, almost proud. When she finally made her way over, he extended a hand. "Congratulations," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the clamor. "I always knew you could do it," she smirked. "You didn't always know." He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Okay, maybe not always, but I see it now, loud and clear." They shared a moment of understanding, the energy in the café swirling around them, a testament to the power of unwavering ambition and the possibility of second chances. Life moved forward. Rachel's Haven became a staple in Briarsville, a favorite gathering spot for Sunday brunch and business meetings alike. Rachel became known for her generosity, often sponsoring local school events and hosting charity bake sales. She even started working with nearby shelters, providing leftover baked goods at the end of each day. She also paid off the investor loan on schedule, never missing a payment. True to her word, she was as responsible with finances as she was passionate about good coffee. In her second year, she expanded the menu to include a small dinner service, adding homemade soups and heartier meals. People adored it. Meanwhile, Michael's philanthropic endeavors continued to grow. He set up a foundation that offered grants and low-interest loans to entrepreneurs with big dreams but limited capital. Every so often, he and Rachel would partner for a community workshop, teaching others how to budget, write business plans, and navigate startup challenges. Over time, rumors swirled around the nature of their relationship, but neither confirmed nor denied anything beyond a supportive friendship. They respected each other's boundaries, forging a bond that felt like an echo of the adversaries. They once were, now turned allies, and maybe something more. Then, on an autumn afternoon, years after that fateful night in the diner, Rachel was busy catering a local event when she heard a gentle knock on the back door of her cafe. Wiping her hands on her apron, she opened it to find Michael Sterling standing there, alone, in casual jeans and a sweater. "Michael," she said, surprised, "what brings you here?" He looked unusually nervous, shifting from foot to foot. "I wanted to ask you something important." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. "Sure, come in." He stepped inside, eyes flickering around the familiar kitchen space. Then he turned to face her with uncharacteristic unease. "I never properly thanked you for picking me up that stormy night. You could have driven past and left me stranded. You didn't." She shrugged. "You needed help. I did what anyone should do." He exhaled. "That's just it. You always do what's right, even if the other person doesn't deserve it." He paused, searching for the right words. "I'm here because I realized something a while back, that every meaningful step in my life over these last few years has had you somewhere in the background pushing me to be better, reminding me to stay grounded, showing me what genuine kindness looks like." Her cheeks warmed. She stared at him, heart pounding. He took a small velvet box from his pocket, letting out a shaky breath. "I don't want to just be the bystander in your life. I want to stand beside you every day, working together, growing together. Rachel Myers, will you?" Her hands flew to her mouth, tears springing unbidden to her eyes. She never imagined it could lead here, never dreamed that the man who once mocked her dream would become the one to champion her hopes, to help her father in his final days, and to stand now at her back door asking this question. Tears rolling down her cheeks, she whispered a trembling, "Yes," her voice thick with emotion. He slipped a ring onto her finger, simple, elegant, a moment that felt surreal, almost like a scene from someone else's life. But as she gazed at the ring, she remembered all the pain, struggle, and redemption that brought them to this moment. In that instant, she realized life had a way of orchestrating the unexpected, the arrogant laugh of a stranger in a diner, eventually leading to the knock of a millionaire at her door, offering not just business opportunities, but the chance of real, lasting love. Conclusion: approximately 150 words. Through heartbreak, doubt, and unexpected twists of fate, Rachel and Michael's story reminds us that life can change in the blink of an eye, and that sometimes the people we least expect can become our greatest allies. From a single late-night conversation in a small-town diner to a sweeping romance that defied every barrier, their journey shows the power of perseverance, humility, and second chances. If you found yourself moved by Rachel's unwavering determination or inspired by how Michael overcame his own pride to support her dream, we invite you to share this story with someone who could use a reminder that hope often lies just around the corner. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more heartwarming, dramatic tales. Together, we'll discover new stories that prove courage, compassion, and love can triumph against all odds.